Okie dokie, check. Alrighty, welcome back, folks, to another chapter of 100 Years of Solitude. I'm so glad that it looks like some of those technical difficulties from yesterday have been overcome. Stand by. I'm also doing this on Twitch as well for overlap. This will be 100 Years of Solitude, Chapter 6 recap, and then we'll dive into Chapter 7. All right. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to another episode of 100 Years of Solitude. Consistently ranked and rated as one of the best books of all time. All right. We find ourselves in Chapter 7 now. Okay. So in Chapter 6, this is taken from litcharts.com. Colonel Aureliano Buendia loses all 32 of the armed uprisings he organizes. Yeah, this book can and does get confusing since literally every character names their son or daughter after themselves, especially the men. Like there are like 5 or 6 Jose Arcadios, and it gets a little bit ridiculous in this book. It's like everyone is the same. Everyone has the same name. Okay, he fathered 17 sons with 17 different women. All of the sons killed on a single night before the oldest turns 35. He survives 14 attempts on his life, 73 ambushes, and a firing squad. He lives through a poisoning, refuses an order of merit offered by the president, and becomes commander of the revolutionary forces. He's never photographed. And I believe this is the husband of the deceased Remedios. Remedios Moscote, she died. Some say she was poisoned by Amarantha. Some say she died trying to give birth to twins that she was given by Aureliano. Aureliano Buendia, he's the first person born in Macondo. Yeah, there's a lot on his character. Colonel Aureliano Buendia helps me to look at this chart that they have in the book because it does get confusing for sure. Yeah, so it's confusing if not only just because Jose Arcadio Buendia and Ursula give birth to a Colonel Aureliano Buendia, and then Colonel Aureliano Buendia has a son that he also names Aureliano Jose that he has with Pilar Ternera. Yes, he is the spouse of Remedios. So yeah. The quiet reserve guy who focuses a lot on creating things. I think he makes things, as I recall. At least before he became a colonel. Okay. He earns money only from the little goldfishes he makes in his workshop. Yeah. So he makes things. After signing a treaty that puts an end to 20 years of civil war, he shoots himself in the chest, but the bullet emerges on the other side of his body without harming him. I still don't know why he does that. I still don't know why he shoots himself. He's like, you know what? Forget this. He dies of natural causes, but he doesn't know that any of this will be the case when he sets out with only 21 men to join the Liberal Army. Left in charge of Macondo, Arcadio proves a despotic ruler, imposing as many as 4 decrees in a day, making insensible laws governing all manner of things. He's very tyrannical, Arcadio, which we might have been able to predict based on the previous chapter. Like every chapter he's been pretty much the same kind of guy. Very I don't know how to describe. I guess macho is how some people might describe it. Yeah, he has a trumpeter at Caterino's store shot for disrespecting him. Don Apollonio Moscote criticizes this liberal paradise, and Arcadio hears of his insult. He storms Don Apollonio Moscote's house and is about to admonish Arcadio and tell him he'll have to kill her too. Arcadio is Ursula's other son. And what's also has a son called Arcadio. But I don't think he's introduced until later on in this chapter. Chapter 6 is what I'm recapping. The soldiers back down. From that time on, Ursula is known as the one truly ruling town. She bound to her husband, still tied to the chestnut tree, but she worries and tells him lies to make him feel better, inadvertently making herself feel better too. I think he gets like delirious where he can't actually hear what she's saying. And he gets to the point where she's just telling he does it because it makes herself feel better. Amarantha and Pietro Crispy, and this was another hot tamale from the last chapter, have deepened their friendship. Bruno Crispy, Pietro's younger brother, runs the music store while Pietro manages the music school. Pietro Crispy suggests that Aureliano Jose might be considered their eldest child. Aureliano Jose is the child born to Colonel Aureliano Buendia and Pilar Ternera. Characters have to name their sons after themselves. And I don't know why Pietro Crispy would suggest that Aureliano is his son when it's not the case. Like it's I think that's what they call like confused parentage. Like that's not actually your son. And interestingly, that's also the reason why the Buendia family did not condone the marriage of Arcadio and Rebecca, because they were saying that they were biological brother and sister, but they're actually not. So there's a lot of like incest in this book and fake incest where it's like they think it's brother and sister, but they're not actually brother and sister. Yeah, I'd say that is the problem with living on an island or in a town like Macondo where everyone's like intermarrying. And this happened in history in some royal families too, where they just had sex with each other to prevent the poor folk from getting in, and it caused all kinds of like genetic defects and stuff. And good on nature for that, because people be doing dumb stuff in the name of greed. Anyway, yeah, greed and exclusivity, and they get what's coming to them. All right. Anyway, yeah, he suggests that Aureliano Jose might be considered their eldest child, but he's actually the child of Aureliano and Pilar. Pietro Crispy finally tells Amarantha that they will marry the following month, Amarantha cruelly rejects him. Pietro Crispi is heartbroken and confused. After making every attempt to reason with her, his brother finds him in his office having slit his wrists. And, apparently Amarantha, like one of the pettiest characters in the novel. She rejects him because he rejected her originally, as a way of like getting back at him. When fate aligns and she finally gets what she wants, what she's been wanting, she's like, you know what, I decided now. I'm sure that reminds me of something, but I just can't think of what it is right now. Hey, Pure. Thank you for watching the show. Hope you are enjoying this chapter of 100 Years of Solitude so far. And thank you for watching, of course. Okay. After making every he kills himself because he can't get either of the loves of his life. Pietro Crispi. Like he loses out on Rebecca, and then he loses out on Amarantha because she's petty and bitter about his rejection of her. Amarantha burns her hand on hot coals in remorse for the trouble she's caused. She covers the burn in black gauze that she keeps in place until her death. The black gauze signifies her remorse over being responsible for Pietro unwillingness to part with her virginity. One night in Caterino's store, someone tells Arcadio that he doesn't deserve his last name, and Arcadio responds that he is not a Buendia, though he doesn't know the truth that his mother is Pilar Ternera. So to limit your confusion on this is now the son of Jose Arcadio the First. So, yeah, confusing as heck. So it's Jose Arcadio Buendia, Jose Arcadio the First, and this is now Arcadio Jr. That, Jose Arcadio had with Pilar. Jose Arcadio himself is married to Rebecca, the first. Arcadio is the cruelest ruler of Macondo, making up unreasonable laws at his slightest whims. Okay. He says he's not a Buendia. When in reality he is. Like, again, confused lineages. Like people don't know who's related to who in this novel. And they don't know where they come from at all, which doesn't make sense because they're all from the same town. Like, you're all from the same town and you're all from the same family. Your grandfather is Jose Arcadio Buendia. Yes, you are Buendia. Confused lineage. On an afternoon before the war began, he tries to seduce her. That's his mom, by the way. Some serious, Back to the Future vibes on that one. But they're both in the present, so it's perhaps even more awkward. Drawn by her smoky scent in the same way his father had been. She tells him to leave his door unlocked that night for her. Pilar pays a young virgin named Santa Sofia de la Piedad 50 pesos to go in her place, and Arcadio falls in love. Later, when Arcadio is named leader, the pair of them have a daughter. Again, I don't know why that's necessary. Does Pilar also not know that she's his mom? I guess it is possible because she's had literally so many kids that for her it's probably hard to keep track. She's like Yeah, I don't even know who my son or daughter is anymore. She's like, I don't even know. Only Jose Arcadio the first and Rebecca know about the newborn girl. Yeah. Husband and wife. Jose Arcadio and Arcadio had become complicit in the act of illegally taking land that belonged to other town residents. When Arcadio had suggested this crime to Jose Arcadio, it's like, Jose Arcadio defended himself by saying that his father had distributed the land, and the case could be made that he had been crazy even at the time of the land distribution. Arcadio visited only with the purpose of allowing Jose Arcadio to take legal ownership of the land and permission for the local government to do the fee collecting. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what this is meant to signify. I think something about real estate markets or something. I'm not entirely sure. Land is confusing and messy. Just ask the Native Americans. Ursula suspects Arcadio is using public funds, and her suspicions are confirmed by her 6-month-old daughter and the pregnant Santa Sofia de la Piedad. Yeah, and she doesn't even have a name. The daughter. It's like some of these women are like pumping out kids so fast. It's like they lose. Like she don't again. Like, take a chill pill, ladies. Take a chill pill. Okay. Woman enters town on a donkey and goes to the barracks and introduces herself to Arcadio as Colonel Gregorio Stevenson. It's like supposed to be a spy, I think. Like a revolutionary who's incognito. He tells him that the last liberal forces were being defeated and that Arcadio should surrender the town for the safety of the inhabitants. He carries a goldfish as evidence of the source of the message, which tells us that he is affiliated with Aureliano. Because Aureliano is the creator of the goldfish. Arcadio doesn't trust the source and plans to defend Macondo despite his insufficient troops. All of them die in the battle except Arcadio, but they kill 300 conservative soldiers in the process. Arcadio is shot at dawn. His last thoughts are filled with both his family and his enemies, whom he realizes he truly loved. His last wish is for his wife to name the unnamed 8-month-old Ursula, and that if the unborn child is a boy, to name it Jose Arcadio after his grandfather. He tells the priest he has nothing to repent. His last thought is that if the unborn baby is a girl, she should be named Remedios, and then he dies. Remedios is, of course, not actually India. She is a descendant of Don Mascote, which seems to reinforce that Arcadio does not believe himself to be a Buendia for some reason. Like, it would actually make sense for him to name his daughter Ursula. It doesn't make sense for him to name his daughter Remedios. Unless he wants to name his daughter after his aunt that he's not biologically related to. He'd be breaking with the tradition of naming your sons and daughters after your parents or yourself. Like, at least you don't have to worry about being creative and trying to come up with a new name. Just name your son after yourself. Name your daughters after your wife. You will never have to be creative or use imagination in coming up with different names. Okay, here we are, chapter 7. The war was over in May. 2 weeks before the government made the official announcement in a high-sounding proclamation which promised merciless punishment for those who had started the rebellion, Colonel Aureliano Buendia fell prisoner just as he was about to reach the western frontier disguised as an Indian witch doctor. Yes, there's a lot of like revolutionary action going on. A lot of in Vietnam too. Guerrilla warfare. Yeah, guerrilla warfare. Of the 21 men who had followed him to war, 14 fell in combat. 6 were wounded and only one accompanied defeat. Colonel Hernelda Marquez, who was his longtime friend. The news of his capture was announced in Macondo with a special proclamation. He's alive, Ursula told her husband. Let's pray to God for his enemies to show him clemency. After 3 days of weeping one afternoon, as she was stirring some sweet milk candy in the kitchen, she heard her ear. It was Aureliano, running toward the chestnut tree to tell her husband the news. I don't know how the miracle took place, but he's alive and we're going to see him very soon. She took it for granted. She had the floors of the house scrubbed and changed the position of the furniture. 1 week later, a rumor from somewhere that was not supported by any proclamation gave dramatic confirmation to the prediction. Colonel Aureliano Buendia had been condemned to death, and the sentence would be carried out in Macondo as a lesson to the population. And that's the scene that we see in the opening chapter of the book. He's facing a firing squad. One Monday at 10:30 in the morning, Amarantha was dressing Aureliano Jose when she heard the sound of a distant troop and the blast of a cornet 1 second before Ursula burst into the room with a shout. They're bringing him now. Amarantha has Aureliano Jose as a result of the death of Remedios. Remedios had adopted Aureliano Jose. Aureliano Jose is the son of Colonel Aureliano Buendia, and Pilar. So again, Pilar doing her bit to populate the worlds relentlessly. like all right, let's see. All right, where was I? Yeah, they're bringing him now. The troops struggled to subdue the overflowing crowd with the rifle butts. Ursula and Amarantha ran to the corner, pushing their way through, and they saw him. He looked like a beggar. His clothing was torn, and he was barefoot. He was walking without feeling the burning tied behind his back with a rope that a mounted officer had attached to the head of his horse. Along with him, also ragged and defeated, they were bringing Colonel Hernelda Marquez. They were not sad. They seemed more disturbed by the crowd that was shouting all kinds of insults at the troops. My son, Ursula shouted in the midst of the uproar, and she slapped a soldier who tried to hold her back. The officer's horse reared. Then Colonel Aureliano Buendia stopped, tremulous, avoided the arms of his mother, and fixed a stern look on her eyes. Go home, Mama, he said. Get permission in jail. He looked at Amarantha, who was 2 steps behind Ursula, and he smiled as he asked her, What happened to your hand? Amarantha raised the hand with the black bandage. Let's see, who... I believe she's his sister. Yeah, I think Amarantha is his sister. "A burn," she said, and took Ursula away so that the horses would not run her down. The troop took off. A special guard surrounded the prisoners and took them to the jail at a trot. At dusk, Ursula visited Colonel Aureliano Buendia in jail. She had tried to get permission through Don Apollinaire Moscote, but he had lost all authority in the face of the military omnipotence. Father Nicanor was in bed with hepatic fever. The parents of Colonel Hernaldo Marquez, who had not been condemned to death, had tried to see him and were driven off with rifle butts. Facing the impossibility of finding anyone to intervene, convinced that her son would be shot at dawn, Ursula wrapped up the things she wanted to bring him and went to the jail alone. "I'm the mother of Colonel Aureliano Buendia," she announced. The sentries blocked her way. "I'm going in any case," Ursula warned them. "So if you have orders to shoot, start right in." She pushed one of them aside and went into the former classroom, where a group of half-dressed soldiers in field uniform, ruddy-faced, with very thick glasses, signaled to the sentries to withdraw. "I'm the mother of Colonel Aureliano Buendia," Ursula repeated. "You must mean," the officer corrected her with a friendly smile, "that you are the mother of Mr. Aureliano Buendia." Yeah, and Ursula also has a pretty major family tree. It's like Abraham in the Bible. Like, she's has like a lineage like you can't believe. Like, Ursula recognized in his effective way of speaking the languid cadence of the stuck-up people from the highlands. "As you say, Mister," she accepted, "just as long as I can see him." There were superior orders that prohibited visits to prisoners condemned to death, but the officer assumed the responsibility of letting her have a 15-minute stay. Ursula showed him what she had in the bundle: a change of clean clothing, the short boots that her son had worn at his wedding, and the sweet milk candy that she had kept for him since the day she had sensed his return. She found Colonel Aureliano Buendia in the room that was used as his cell, lying on a cot with his arms spread out because his armpits were paved with sores. It allowed him to shave. The thick mustache accentuated the sharp angles of his cheekbones. He looked paler to Ursula than when he had left, a little taller and more solitary than ever. He knew all about the details of the house: Pietro Crispi's suicide, Archidio's arbitrary acts and execution, the dauntlessness of Jose Arquidio Buendia underneath the chestnut tree. I think even after he was untied, he still didn't leave. I think he already has been untied in the book. He knew that Amarantha had although it could be the case that he's just so old that he just doesn't care anymore. He's like, "This is my fate." He knew that Amarantha had consecrated her virginal widowhood. Rearing of Aureliano Jose, and that the latter was beginning to show signs of quite good judgment, and that he had learned to read and write at the same time he had learned to speak. From the moment in which he entered the room, Ursula felt inhibited by the maturity of her son, by his aura of command, by the glow of authority that radiated from his skin. She was surprised that he was so well informed. "You knew all along that I was a wizard," he joked. And he added in a serious tone, "This morning when they brought me in, I had the impression that I had already been through all that before." In fact, while the crowd was roaring alongside him, he had been concentrating his thoughts, startled at how the town had aged. The leaves of the almond trees were broken. The houses painted blue, then painted red, had ended up with an indefinable coloration. "What did you expect?" Ursula sighed. "Time passes." "That's how it goes," Aureliano admitted, "but not so much. Time is cyclical in this novel. So, like, things keep happening over and over again. Like, one example of this is Milkades coming back from the dead. It's almost as if time doesn't truly advance or go forward because it just keeps returning to a previous point in time. Another way that this is portrayed in the book is through the characters naming their kids after themselves. It's like a way that history has of repeating itself. As every kid is the same name as their dad. So it kind of gives the impression that history is not truly advancing. It just keeps happening. In that way, the long-awaited visit, for which both had prepared questions and had even anticipated answers, was once more the usual. When the guard announced the end of the visit, Aureliano took out a roll of sweaty papers from under the cot. They were his poetry, the poems inspired by Remedios, which he had taken with him when he left, and those he had written later on during the chance pauses in the war. Yeah, pretty sad. Like, Remedios' passing is one of the saddest things in this book. She was like one of the goodest, like one of the best characters in the family, and then she has to die. Like, I mean, she was even taking care of Jose Arcadio Buendia before she died. Promise me that no one will read them, he said. Light the oven with them this very night. Ursula promised and stood up to kiss him goodbye. I brought you a revolver, she murmured. Colonel Aureliano Buendia saw that the sentry could not see. Yeah, I don't know what the point of that is going to be if you're sentenced to die by firing squad in the morning. Like, it won't do me any good, he said in a low voice. But give it to me in case they search you on the way out. Like, exactly, like, what's the point at that point? Hopefully I'm saying that right. Hang on a second.
Bodice.
Okay. Need these bathroom. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. And I'm back. Bodice. It's an article of clothing for women and girls covering the torso from the neck to the waist. Kind of like a vest. Like, yeah. It's like an old-fashioned vest for women. Yeah, so she took the gun out of that. Put it under the mattress of the cot. And don't say goodbye, he concluded with emphatic calmness. Don't beg or bow down to anyone. Pretend that they shot me a long time ago. Ursula bit her lip so as to not cry. Put some hot stones on those sores, she said. She turned halfway around and left the room. Colonel Aureliano Buendia remained standing, thoughtful, until the door closed. Then he lay down again with his arms. Since the beginning of adolescence, when he had begun to be aware of his, he thought that death would be announced with a definite, unequivocal, irrevocable signal. But there were only a few hours left before he would die, and the signal had not come. On a certain occasion, a very beautiful woman had come into his camp in Tucurinca. And asked the fanaticism of some mothers, who sent their daughters to the bedrooms of the most famous warriors, according to what they said, to improve the breed. That night, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was finishing the poem about the man who is lost in the rain when the girl came into his room. He turned his back to her and put the sheet of paper into the locked drawer where he kept his poetry. And then he sensed it. He grasped the pistol in the drawer without turning his head. Please don't shoot, he said. I don't know why he would say that if he's the one with the gun in his hand. When he turned around holding his pistol, the girl had lowered hers and did not know what to do. Okay. So maybe she came there to kill him or something. I know, again, he's said to be executed at dawn, so I don't know what the point of that will be. It's like you're a little late to the party, yo. On the other hand, someone who was never caught entered the revolutionary headquarters one night in Manaur and stabbed to death his close friend, Colonel Magnifico Vizbal. He could sweat out of fever. A few yards away, sleeping in a not aware of anything. His efforts to systematize his premonitions were useless. They would come suddenly in a wave of supernatural lucidity, momentaneous conviction. But they could not be grasped. On occasion, they were so natural that he identified them as premonitions only fulfilled. Frequently, they were nothing but ordinary bits of superstition. Don't seem real. When they condemned him to death, it's like he doesn't know when he can tell the future or not. Only when it actually happens does he know. It was like, okay, yeah, that was actually a premonition. But when they condemned him to death and asked him to state his last wish, he did not have the least difficulty in identifying the premonition that inspired his answer. I asked that the sentence be carried out in Macondo, he said. The president of the court-martial was annoyed. Don't be clever, Buendia, he told him. That's just a trick to gain more time. If you don't fulfill it, that will be your worry, the colonel said, but that's my last wish. Since then, the premonitions had abandoned him. The day when Ursula visited him in jail, after a great deal of thinking, he came to the conclusion that perhaps death would not be announced at that time because it did not depend on chance, but on will of his executioners. He spent the night awake, tormented by the pain of his sores. A little before dawn, he heard steps in the hallway. Yeah, I don't know. I don't fully understand Aureliano's like political beliefs and whatnot. I think he's like very idealistic, but he balances that with practicality. I think it's like he's idealistic and practical, and he balances that with family beliefs. They're coming, he said to himself. Buendia, who at that moment was thinking about him under the tree. He did not feel fear or nostalgia, but an intestinal rage that this artificial death would not let him see the end of so many things. The door opened and a sentry came in with a mug of coffee. On the following day at the same hour, he would still be doing what he was then, raging with the pain in his armpits. The same thing happened. On Thursday, he shared the sweet milk candy with the guards and put on his clean clothes, which were tight for him, and the patent leather boots. But Friday, they still had not shot him. It's pretty surprising that they keep delaying his execution. Actually, they did not dare carry out the sentence. The rebelliousness of the town made the military men think that the execution of Colonel Aureliano Buendia might have serious political consequences not only in Macondo but throughout the area of the swamp. So they consulted the authorities in the capital of the province. Okay, he's like a political hero, and that's the reason why they're not carrying out the execution. Okay. You think of anyone similar? And that's not the best example because JFK was assassinated. So, yeah, I don't know. I think about it. On Saturday night, while they're waiting for an answer, Captain Roque Carnicero went with some other officers to Caterino's place. Only one woman practically. They don't want to go. Going to die, she confessed to him. No one knows how it will come, but everybody is going around saying that the officer who shoots Colonel Aureliano Buendia and all the soldiers in the squad, one by one, will be murdered with no escape sooner or later, even if they hide at the ends of the earth. Captain Roque Carnicero mentioned it to the other officers, and they told their superiors. On Sunday, although no one had revealed it openly, although no action on the part of the military had disturbed the tense calm of those days, the whole town knew that the officers were ready to use any manner of pretext to avoid responsibility for the execution. I don't know why they would have any reason to fear the people of Macondo because weapons. I don't get it at all. The official order arrived in the Monday mail. The execution was to be carried out within 24 hours. That night, the officers put 7 slips of paper into a cap. Captain Roque Carnicero's unpeaceful fate was foreseen by his name on the prize slip. Bad luck. True. Born a son of a bitch, I'm going to die, son of a bitch. 5 in the morning, he chose the squad by lot, formed it in the courtyard, and woke up the condemned man with a premonitory phrase. Let's go, Buendia, he told him. Our time has come. So that's what it was, the colonel replied. I was dreaming that my sores had burst. Rebecca Buendia got up at 3 in the morning when she learned that Aureliano would be shot. She stayed in the bedroom in the dark, watching the cemetery wall through the half-open window as the bed on which she sat shook with Jose Arcadio's snoring. She waited all week with the same hidden persistence with which, during different times, she waited for Pietro Crispi's letters. Does she know that he died? And more importantly, perhaps, how does she actually feel about it? Because we've only seen how Amarantha reacted to the death. They won't told her. And I assume not Junior. I think Junior actually died. Yeah, I think he's already died. He died during the last chapter. They shoot him at midnight in the quad, and they'll bury him right there. Rebecca kept on waiting. They're stupid enough to shoot him here, she said. She was so certain that she had foreseen the way she would open the door to wave goodbye. They won't bring him through the streets, Jose Arcadio insisted, with 6 scared soldiers, and knowing that the people are ready for anything. Logic, Rebecca stayed by the window. You'll see that they're just stupid. Tuesday at 5 in the morning, Jose Arcadio had drunk his coffee and let the dogs out. And Rebecca closed the window and held onto the head of the bed so as to not fall down. They're bringing him, she sighed. He's so handsome. Jose Arcadio looked out the window and saw him, tremulous in the light of dawn. He already had his back to the wall, and his hands were on his hips because the burning knots in his armpits would not let him lower them. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that's meant to signify. I guess his time carrying something, the rifle or something. I don't know. A person fucks himself up so much, Colonel Aureliano Buendia said. Fucks himself up so much just so that 6 weak fairies can kill him and he can't do anything about it. He repeated it with so much rage that it had almost seemed to be fervor, and Captain Roque Carnicer was touched, because he thought he was praying. When the squad took aim, the rage had materialized into a vicious and bitter substance that put his tongue to sleep and made him close his eyes. Then the aluminum glow of dawn disappeared, and he saw himself again in short pants, wearing a tie around his neck. He saw his father leading him into the tent on a splendid afternoon, and he saw the ice. Like nostalgia, thoughts from his childhood. When he heard the shout, he thought that it was the final command of the squad. He opened his eyes with a shudder of curiosity at the incandescent trajectory of the bullets. But he with his arms in the air and Jose Arcadio crossing the street with his fearsome shotgun ready to go off. Don't shoot, the captain said to Jose Arcadio. You were sent by divine providence. Another war began right there. Men left with Colonel Aureliano Buendia to free the revolutionary General Victorio Medina, who had been condemned to death in Riohacha. So they decided not to execute him. They thought they could save time by Jose Arcadio Buendia had followed to found Macondo, but before a week was out, they were convinced that it was an impossible undertaking. The dangerous route over the outcroppings with no other munitions. They would camp near the towns of one of them. With a small goldfish in his hand, would go in disguise in broad daylight to contact the dormant liberals, who'd go out hunting on the following morning and never return. Oh, my nose itches. When they saw Riohacha from a ridge in the mountains, General Victorio Medina had been shot. Colonel Aureliano Buendia's men proclaimed him chief of the revolutionary forces of the Caribbean coast with the rank of general. He assumed the position, but refused that he would never accept it as long as the conservative regime was in power. For 3 months, they had succeeded in arming more than 1,000 men, but they were wiped out. The survivors reached the eastern frontier. The next thing that was heard of them was that they had landed on Cabo de la Vela. Coming from the smaller islands of the Antilles, and a message from the government was sent all over by telegraph and throughout the country announcing the death of Colonel Aureliano Buendia. So where was he shot? In Macondo? But 2 days later, a multiple telegram which almost overtook the previous one announced another uprising on the southern plains. That was how the legend of the ubiquitous Colonel Aureliano Buendia began. Simultaneous and contradictory information declared him victorious in Guacamayo, devoured by Mitolan Indians, dead in the village in the swamp, and up in arms again in Urmita. I think he's supposed to be like Che Guevara or something. Like some kind of revolutionary. Liberal leaders who at that moment were negotiating for participation in Congress branded him an adventurer who did not represent the party. The national government placed him in the category of a bandit and put a price of $5. After 16 defeats, Colonel Aureliano Buendía with 2,000 well-armed Indians and the garrison, which was taken by surprise as it slept, abandoned Riohacha. He established his headquarters there and proclaimed total war against the regime. The first message he received from the government was a threat to shoot Colonel Hernaldo Marquez within 48 hours if he did not withdraw his forces to the eastern frontier. Colonel Roque Carnicero, who was his chief of staff then, gave him the telegram with a look of consternation. But "How wonderful," he exclaimed. "We have a telegraph office now." His reply was definitive. In 3 months, he expected to establish his headquarters in Macondo. If he did not find Colonel Hernaldo Marquez alive at that time, he held prisoner them, and he would give orders to his subordinates to do the same for the rest of the war. 3 months later, when he entered Macondo in triumph, the first embrace he received on the swamp road was that of Colonel Hernaldo Marquez. The house was full of children. Ursula had taken in Santa Sofia de la Piedad with her older daughter and a pair of twins, who had been born 5 months after Arcadio had been shot. Contrary to the victim's last wishes, she baptized the girl with the name Remedios, which is what he wanted her to be named anyway. He just doesn't say that. Like, yeah, he just doesn't say that. He wants her to be named Remedios. Ursula. Contrary to the victim's last wishes, she baptized the girl with the name Remedios. But not really. But not really against his wishes. I'm sure that was what Arcadio meant, she alleged. Yeah, and it really was. We won't call her Ursula because a person suffers too much with that name. That is his actual grandson. The twins were named Jose Arcadio Segundo and Aureliano Segundo. What? Again, these would be the fourths, I'm pretty sure. Aureliano Segundo is, let's see, Jose Arcadio Segundo is actually Jose Arcadio the third, or fourth if we count Jose Arcadio Buendía as the first. Because there's Jose Arcadio the first, the son of Jose Arcadio Buendía, and then there's Arcadio, son of Jose Arcadio the first, and then that Arcadio was the one who was shot, and then Jose Arcadio, so that would be Jose Arcadio the third. But he's named Jose Arcadio Segundo, because apparently they lost track of how many Jose Arcadios there are in the family. Aureliano Segundo. Let's see, there's Colonel Aureliano Buendía, who's the son of Jose Arcadio Buendía. Colonel Aureliano Buendía has a son with Pilar called Aureliano Jose, who's the Aureliano II. So yeah, Aureliano Segundo is actually Aureliano III. Amarantha took care of them all. Tribute for her past misdeeds, I don't know. Like a pang of conscience or something. She put small wooden chairs in the living room and established a nursery with other children from. When Colonel Aureliano Buendía returned in the midst of exploding rockets and ringing bells, a children's chorus welcomed him to the house. I'm surprised he wasn't shot. Aureliano Jose, tall like his grandfather, dressed as a revolutionary officer, gave him military honors. That Aureliano Jose, that must be the son of Pilar, I think. But what's strange is it says tall like his grandfather, so that must be Jose Arcadio, right? Yeah, Jose Arcadio Buendia. No, all the news was good. The year after the flight of Colonel Aureliano Buendia, Jose Arcadio and Rebecca went to live in the house Arcadio built. Jose Arcadio is the senior. Yeah, I think, and Arcadio is the junior. Yeah, it's definitely confusing. No one knew about his intervention to halt the execution. The new house located on the best corner of the square in the shade of an almond tree that was honored by 3 nests of red breasts, the large door for visitors, and 4 windows for light. They set up a hospitable home. Rebecca's old friends, among them 4 of the Moscote sisters who were still single, once more took up the sessions of embroidery that had been interrupted years before on the porch with the begonias. Jose Arcadio continued to profit from the usurped lands, the title to which was recognized by the conservative government. Every afternoon he could be seen returning on horseback with his hunting dogs and his double-barreled shotgun and a string of rabbits hanging from his saddle. One September afternoon, with the threat of a storm, he returned home earlier than usual. He greeted Rebecca in the dining room, tied the dogs up in the courtyard, hung the rabbits up in the kitchen to be salted later. Rebecca later declared that when her husband went into the bedroom and did not hear anything. It was a difficult version to believe, but there was no other more plausible. No one could think of any motive for Rebecca to murder the man who had made her happy. That was perhaps the only mystery that was never cleared up in Macondo. I don't know, it doesn't seem reasonable for her to kill Arcadio. Jose Arcadio. Yeah, mega confusing. Jose is junior, so I mean, in a strange way, it's good that some of these characters are dying off because it's less confusing that way. It's like, okay, great. Now there's only one Arcadio. And actually, the Arcadio that's still alive is Arcadio the Third. I think in real life, we make it less confusing by calling people like first, second, third. Like, I have a friend who's the third. His father's like the second, I think. 3 generations with the same name. Was the bedroom door, the sound of a pistol shot echoed through the house. A trickle of blood came out under the door, crossed the living room, and went into the street. Continued on in a straight line across the uneven terraces, went down steps and climbed over curbs, passed along the street of Turks, turned a corner to the right and another to the left, made a tight angle at the Buendia house, went in under the closed door, crossed through the parlor, hugging the walls so as to not stain the rugs, went on to the other living room, made a wide curve to avoid the dining room table, went along the porch with the begonias, and passed without being seen under Amarantha's chair as she gave an arithmetic lesson to Aureliano Jose. Went through the pantry and came out in the kitchen where Ursula was getting ready to crack 36 eggs to make bread. It's like flubber. It's like, ding, 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 ding. Holy Mother of God, Ursula. Blood back along its course. In search of its origin, she went to the begonia porch where Aureliano Jose was chanting that 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 3 is 9. She crossed the dining room and living rooms and followed straight down the street. She turned first to the right and then to the left, to the street of the Turks, forgetting that she was still wearing her baking apron and her house slippers. She came out onto the square and went into the door. She pushed open the bedroom door and was almost suffocated. She found Jose Arcadio lying face down on the ground and on top of the leggings he had just taken off. She saw the starting point of the thread of blood that had already stopped flowing out of his right ear. They found no wound on his body, nor could they locate the weapon, nor was it possible to remove the smell of powder from the corpse. First, they washed him 3 times with soap and a scrubbing brush, and they rubbed him with salt and vinegar. Then with ashes and lemon. Finally, they put him in a barrel of lye and let him scrub him so much that the tattooing began to fade. When they thought of the desperate measure of seasoning him with pepper, cumin seeds, and laurel leaves and boiling him for a whole day over a slow fire, he had already begun to decompose, and they had buried him hastily. They sealed him hermetically in a special coffin 7.5 feet long and 4 feet wide, reinforced inside with iron plates and fastened together with steel bolts. Even the smell could be perceived on the streets through which the funeral procession passed. Father Nicanor, with his liver enlarged, and blessing from bed. Although in the months that followed, they reinforced the grave with walls about it, between which they threw compressed ash, sawdust, and quicklime. The cemetery still smelled of powder for many years after, until the engineers from the banana company covered the grave over with a shell of concrete, covered with a thick crust of disdain that no earthly temptation was ever able to break. Is she the one who shot the shot? And if so, why? Why would you do such a thing? And Rebecca, it's like do the messed up things they do. Like, actually, Rebecca, to her credit, has she's made some pretty bad choices actually. Okay, she went out. Okay, I already read that. Let's see, where am I? She sealed herself. She went out into the street on one occasion when she was very old. Old silver and a hat made of tiny flowers. During the time that the wandering Jew passed through the town and brought on a heat wave that was so intense that birds broke through the window screens to come to die in the bedrooms. The last time anyone saw her alive was when, with one shot, she killed a thief who was trying to force the door of her house. Was it an accident? Except for Arganita, her servant and confidant, no one ever had any more contact with her after that. One time it was discovered that she was writing letters to the bishop, whom she claimed as a first cousin, but it was never said whether she received any reply. The town forgot about her. Yeah, I'm not even entirely sure what relation Rebecca is. She just showed up one day, so technically she's not related to anyone there. In spite of his triumphal return, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was not enthusiastic over the look of things. The government troops abandoned their positions without resistance, and that aroused an illusion of victory among the liberal population that it was not right to destroy, but the revolutionaries knew the truth. Colonel Aureliano Buendia better than any of them. Although at that moment he had more than 5,000 men under his command and held 2 coastal states, he had the feeling of being hemmed in against the sea and caught in a situation that was so confused that when he ordered the restoration of the church steeple, which had been knocked down by army cannon fire, Father Nicanor commented from his destroyed the church and the Masons' order rebuilt. Through which he could escape, he spent hours on end in the telegraph office, conferring with the commanders of other towns, and every time he would emerge with the firmest impression that the war was at a stalemate. When news of fresh liberal victories were received, it was celebrated with jubilant proclamations, but he would measure the real extent of them on the map, and see that his forces were penetrating into the jungle, defending themselves against malaria and mosquitoes, advancing in the opposite direction from reality. We're wasting time, he would complain to his officers. We're wasting time while the bastards in the party are begging for seats in Congress. Lying awake at night, stretched out on his back in a hammock in the same room where he had waited death, he would evoke the image of lawyers dressed in black, leaving the presidential palace in the icy cold of early morning, with their coat collars turned up about their ears, rubbing their hands, whispering, taking refuge in dreary early morning cafes to speculate over what the president had meant when he said yes, or what he had meant when he said no, even to imagine what the president was thinking when he had said something quite different, as he chased away mosquitoes at a temperature of 95 degrees, feeling the approach of the fearsome dawn when he would have to give his men the command to jump into the sea. Yeah, he reminds me of Robin Hood or something. Like he's anywhere and everywhere. One night of uncertainty, when Pilar Turner was singing in the courtyard with the soldiers, he asked her to read the future in her cards. Watch out for your mouth, was all that Pilar Turner brought out after spreading and picking up the card 3 times. I don't know what it means, but the sign is very clear. Watch out for your mouth. 2 days later, someone gave an orderly a mug of black coffee, and the orderly passed it on to someone else, and that one to someone else until, hand to hand, it reached Colonel Aureliano Buendia's office. He had not asked for any coffee, but since it was there, the colonel drank it. It had a dose of nux vomica strong enough to kill a horse. When they took him home, he was stiff and arched, and his tongue was sticking out between his teeth. Ursula fought against death over him. After cleaning out his stomach with emetics, she wrapped him in hot blankets and fed him egg whites for 2 days until his hair and body recovered its normal temperature. Let's see, what are emetics? Medicine that causes vomiting. Why would he drink that, though? I don't know. And he never was shot. He was never executed. It just kept getting delayed. On the 4th day, he was out of danger. Against his officers, he stayed in bed for another week. Only then did he learn that his... I didn't want to be hasty, Ursula explained to him. That night when I went to light the oven, I said to myself that it would be better to wait until they brought the body. In the haze of convalescence, surrounded by Remedios' dusty dolls, Colonel Aureliano Buendia brought back the decisive periods of his existence by reading his poetry. He started writing again, for many hours bouncing on the edge of the surprises of a war with no future. In rhyme verse, he resolved his experience on the shores of death. Then his thoughts became so clear that he was able to examine them forward and back. Colonel Amarantha Maruqez, tell me something, old friend. What other reason could there be? Colonel Amarantha Maruqez answered. For the great Liberal Party. You're lucky because you know why, he answered. As far as I'm concerned, I've come to realize only just now that I'm fighting because of pride. I have to use the bathroom again. Okay. Liberals against conservatives. Happens in 100 Years of Solitude, too. That's bad, Colonel Amarantha Maruqez said. Colonel Aureliano Buendia was amused at his alarm. Naturally, he said, but in any case is better than not knowing why you're fighting. Fighting like you for something that doesn't have any meaning for anyone. It prevented him from making contact with the armed groups in the interior of the country until the leaders of the party publicly rectified their declaration that he was a bandit. He knew, however, that as soon as he put those scruples aside, he would break the vicious circle of the war. Convalescence gave him time to reflect. Then he succeeded in getting Ursula to give him the rest of her buried inheritance and her substantial savings. He named Colonel Arenaldo Marquez civil and military leader of Macondo, and he went off to make contact with the rebel group. Colonel Arenaldo Marquez was not the only man closest to Colonel Aureliano Buendia, but Ursula received him as a member of the family. Fragile, timid, with natural good manners, he was, however, better suited for war than for government. Easily entangled him in theoretical labyrinths. But he succeeded in giving Macondo the atmosphere of rural peace that Colonel Aureliano Buendia dreamed of, so that he could die of old age making little goldfishes. Although he lived in his parents' house, he would have lunch at Ursula's 2 or 3 times a week. He initiated Aureliano Jose in the use of firearms, gave him early military instruction, and for several months took him to live in the barracks, with Ursula's consent, so that he could become a man. Many years before, when he was still almost a child, Arenaldo Marquez had declared his love for Amarantha. At that time, she was so illusioned with her lonely passion for Pietro Crispi that she laughed at him. Arenaldo Marquez waited. On a certain occasion, he sent Amarantha a note from jail asking her to embroider a dozen batiste handkerchiefs with his father's initials on them. He sent her the money. A week later, Amarantha brought the dozen handkerchiefs to him in jail along with the money, and they spent several hours talking about the past. "When I get out of here, I'm going to marry you," Arenaldo Marquez told her when she left. Amarantha laughs, but she kept on thinking about him while she taught the children to read, and she tried to revive her juvenile passion for Pietro Crispi. Was he still alive at that point? On Saturdays, visiting day for the prisoners, she would stop by the house of Arenaldo Marquez's parents and accompany them. One of those Saturdays, Ursula was surprised to see her waiting for the biscuits to come out of the oven so that she could pick the best ones and wrap them in a napkin that she had embroidered for the occasion. "Marry him," she told her. Amarantha feigned a reaction of displeasure. "I don't have to," she answered. "I'm taking these biscuits to Arenaldo because I'm sorry that sooner or later they're going to shoot him." She said it without thinking, but that was... The government had announced its threat to shoot Colonel Arenaldo Marquez and Riohacha. The visit stopped. Amarantha shut herself up to weep, overwhelmed by a feeling of guilt similar to the one that had tormented her when Remedios died, as if once more her careless words had been responsible for a death. Her mother consoled her. She assured her that Colonel Aureliano Buendia would do something to prevent the execution and promised that she would take charge of attracting Arenaldo Marquez herself when the war was over. She fulfilled her promise before the imagined time. When Arenaldo Marquez returned to the civil and military leader, she received him as a thought of delightful bits of flattery to hold him there, and prayed with all her soul that he would remember his plan to marry Amarantha. Her pleas seemed to be answered. On the days that he would have lunch at the house, Colonel Arenaldo Marquez would linger on the begonia porch playing Chinese checkers with Amarantha. Ursula would bring them coffee and milk and biscuits and would take over the children so that they would not bother them. Amarantha was really making an effort to kindle in her heart the forgotten ashes of her youthful passion. With an anxiety that came to be intolerable, she waited for the lunch days. The afternoons of Chinese checkers. Time flew by in the company of the warrior with a nostalgic name whose fingers trembled imperceptibly as he moved the pieces. But the day on which Colonel Arenaldo Marquez repeated his wish to marry her, she rejected him. "I'm not going to," she told him, "much less you. You love Aureliano so much that you want to marry me because you can't marry him." She's a man-eater. Yeah, woe to any man unlucky enough to try to marry Amarantha. Colonel Arenaldo Marquez was a patient man. "I'll keep on insisting," he said. "Sooner or later I'll convince you." He kept on visiting the house. "You're doomed, man. You're doomed." Shut up in her bedroom, biting back her secret tears, Amarantha put her fingers in her ears so as to not hear the voice of the suitor as he gave Ursula the latest war news, in spite of the fact that she was dying him. At the time, Colonel Aureliano a detailed account to Macondo every 2 weeks. But only once, almost 8 months after he had left, did he write to Ursula. A special messenger brought a sealed envelope to the house with a sheet of paper inside bearing the colonel's delicate hand. "Take good care of Papa because he's going to die." Ursula became alarmed. "If Aureliano says so, it's because Aureliano knows," she said, and she would take Jose Arcadio Buendia to his bedroom. ever, but during his prolonged stay under the chestnut tree, he had developed the faculty of being able to increase his weight at will, to such a degree that 7 men were unable to lift him, and they had to drag him to the bed. A smell of tender mushrooms, of a wood flower fungus, of old and concentrated outdoors impregnated the air of the bedroom as it was breathed by the colossal old man, the sun and the rain. Next morning he was not in his bed. In spite of his undiminished strength, Jose Arcadio Buendia was in no condition to resist. It was all the same to him. He went back to the chestnut tree. It was not because he wanted to. Ursula took care of him, fed him, brought him news of Aureliano. But actually, the only person with whom he was able to have contact for a long time was Prudencio Aguilar. Almost pulverized at that time by the decrepitude of death, Prudencio Aguilar would come twice a day to chat with him. They talked about fighting cocks. They promised each other to set up a breeding farm for magnificent birds, not so much to enjoy their victories, which they would not need then, as to have something to do on the tedious Sundays of death. It was Prudencio Aguilar who cleaned him, fed him, and brought him splendid news of an unknown person called Aureliano who was a colonel in the war. When he was alone, Jose Arcadio Buendia consoled himself with the dream of the infinite rooms. He dreamed that he was getting out of bed, opening the door, going into an identical room with the same bed with a wrought iron head, the same wicker chair, and the same small picture of the Virgin of Help on the back wall. From that room he would go into another that was just the same, the door of which would open into another that was just the same, the door of which would open into another, one just the same, and then into another exactly alike, and so on to infinity. He liked to go from room to room, as in a gallery of parallel mirrors, until Prudencio Aguilar would touch him on the shoulder. Then he would go back from room to room, walking in reverse, going back over his trail, and he would find Prudencio Aguilar in the room of reality. One night, 2 weeks after they took him to his bed, Prudencio Aguilar touched his shoulder and then the following morning, Ursula was bringing him his breakfast along the hall. He was short and stocky with a black suit on and a hat that was also black, enormous, pulled down to his taciturn eyes. Good Lord, Ursula thought, I could have sworn it was Melchiades. It was Katar, Visitation's brother, who had left the house fleeing from the insomnia plague, and of whom there had never been any. Visitation asked him why he had come back, and he answered her in their solemn language. I have come for the exequies of the king. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Funeral, I think, is what it means. I think it's Spanish. Exequias. Yeah, I guess it's a funeral. Oh, I'm spelling it wrong. Yeah, funeral rites. Then they went into Jose Arcadio Buendia's room, shook him as hard as they could, shouted in his ear. They could not waken him. A short time later, when the carpenter was taking the coffin, through the window they saw a light rain of tiny little flowers falling. They fell in the town all through the night in a silent storm, and they covered the roofs and blocked doors. So many flowers fell from the sky that in the morning, with a compact cushion, they had to clear them away with shovels and rakes so that the funeral procession could pass by. Wow, so Jose Arcadio Buendia finally passes here in the 7th chapter. Stay tuned for chapter 8. I'll be following this stream with Crime and Punishment. I don't think there were any issues with the YouTube side, so hopefully those have been fixed today. My goal will be to read a chapter a day of 100 Years of Solitude. We're about halfway through the book now, and I'm hoping. Let's see. It'll be 5 days, I think, that it's due. So we may or may not get there by the library's due date. but I don't know. I'll have to wait and see because some chapters might be longer. So possible a chapter a day to finish it in a few days. But thank you for watching, and we'll be right back.